Hi guys, welcome to Thursday's lecture for week 10. So today is going to consist of a mixture of things. We're going to talk about some things that I've noticed as I've been grading your A2s that I just want to call your attention to so that you don't make these sort of mistakes in A3. So we'll start with that. The first thing I want to talk about is eliminating wordy phrases. And I made this sort of chart here so that I can show you what I mean by that. So things like at this point in time, instead of saying all of that, which is really wordy, just say now. Really wordy phrases are going to exhaust your reader. They detract from your main points. So you want to make sure that you're being as concise as possible, especially in an argumentative essay. Another example is due to the fact that we have just because. So I want you guys to just sort of look through these on your own and make sure that if you're doing any of this on the left-hand side, that you're replacing it with more concise versions like the ones on the right-hand side. And then here are some more examples of that. I'll let you all look through that on your own. I also want to talk about redundancies. So this is kind of like being more concise as well, but they're things that repeat themselves. And so things like past history. Well, both of these words are already indicating that something is past, or things like refer back. If you're referring to something, you're already going back to it. So you don't need to say refer back. So make sure that you are being concise, but that you're being clear, and that your words are providing your reader enough detail to understand your meaning. So the flip side of being overly wordy is using vague words. So this is something that else that you want to avoid. You want to make sure you're being clear. So if you're going to say something like people, you want to specify who. If you're saying things, these kinds of things, what kind of things? Tell us specifically what those things are. If you talk about society, make sure that you're being specific about what part of society, or even Americans. That seems specific, but what group of Americans? It's such a vast word. Even things like government can be specified further. So make sure that you're being as specific as possible when you're talking about these things. And then also be specific with words that have ambiguous meanings. So if we're talking about effects of eating together, are these positive or negative effects? If you mention consequences, again, are they positive or negative? If we're talking about change, what kind of a change is it? Is it a positive or negative change? Is it an increase or a decrease? If you're saying something impacts something, how severe is this impact? And to what degree does it influence? So make sure that if you're using any of these words, you're being really specific about the meaning of them. And now that we've sort of gone over some of the things that I noticed in A2, I do want to talk about citing sources in MLA format. And this is something that we're still going to be doing in A3, and we're going to be relying on pretty heavily since it's a research argument. So let's talk about how to cite a peer-reviewed source first, since that's what's upcoming for your assignment. So first you'd list the authors. And you'll always list them alphabetically. You'll then have the hanging indent here, and then you'll include the article title just after the authors, the title of the journal where it's been published, and then the volume, issue, date of publication, and page number, and the name of the database. And if it has a DOI or a URL, you're accessing it online, you'll want to include that at the very end as well. And it's really important for you guys to note the things that are being put in quotations, like the titles of articles, things that are being put in italics, like the journal title, and note where the periods are in these situations as well. You'll be graded on all of this, so make sure that you're doing it correctly. Now let's talk about popular sources. So your next set of annotations after this week's will be on popular media sources. So you'll want to make sure that you know how to do that. And this is pretty similar, but a little different. So you'll list the authors. A lot of the times with popular sources, there's just one author. Then you'll include the article title, the title of the publication, so where you found it, and then the volume, issue, date of publication, and page numbers, if those are applicable. The name of the database where you found it. So a lot of you will be looking for things in the Academic Search Premier, which is the library's database here at CSU. Make sure that you're including that and giving it credit for bringing these sources to you. And then again, you'll just include the DOI or the URL where you accessed it, if that's applicable. So now I want to pivot a little bit to talk about return of A2. So I do put in place a 24-hour waiting period before I'll discuss your writing with you. So if you have questions about any of my comments or about your grade, please do respect that 24-hour period, and then we can talk about it. Some things to keep in mind, especially as we move into A3, I noticed that some audiences were too broad, or there were more than one stakeholder. So make sure that you are focusing your audience to one stakeholder or one stakeholder group. Oftentimes, students had brilliant solutions, but they couldn't be implemented by the target audience that was chosen. So make sure that the information you are including is relevant to your audience. Also notice that there were students that identified the values of their stakeholder but had little development on those values. So consider explaining the impact that these values have on your stakeholder. And that includes things like research that you put in your A3. You'll make sure that if you're including a quotation from another source, you're explaining how it's applicable to your point and your overall claim. And another thing I noticed is that some of these proposals were not appealing to your stakeholders' values, but were instead echoing your own values. So we want to make sure that you're completely tailoring that to your stakeholder, especially with an argumentative essay. So how can you focus your research? Well, this is what we've been writing these questions for, these inquiry questions. So this is another little activity that I want you to do on your own, but I want you to, on a sheet of paper, make 2 columns, what you know about the topic and what you want to know about your topic. And start with the what you know and write down every single thing that you either have already learned or already knew about this topic before the research. And then in your what you want to know section, write down any questions that you have about this topic. Especially consider whether there's a specific stakeholder or perspective that you want to learn more about. And whether there are still areas on this topic that you don't fully understand. You want to make sure that any of those questions are answered, because if you have those questions, your stakeholder likely has them as well. And then I really want you guys to think about how the different sources are contributing to adding complexity to the issue, and showing the different perspectives of that issue. That will lead me to the stakeholders. So I want you to list 4 or 5 potential stakeholders in this issue. What is their stake, and do you have sources that discuss their stake? So is their point of view being considered by the sources that you have done research on? And if not, you'll want to make sure that they are. And then would it help you to schedule an appointment with me and have a face-to-face conversation about your assignment and what your ideas are? And if so, make sure that you do get that email into me so that I can reserve a time slot for us to meet. So if you guys have any questions at all about any of this, feel free to email me. Your homework is to read Chapter 8, Managing Your Sources, pages 132 to 139. I want you to determine how you want to keep track of your research. This is going to be a super important part of your research process. And then I want you to watch the video titled Creating MLA Citations. As you watch, make sure to pay close attention to the formatting guidelines that you're expected to use. And then also skim through the Use MLA Style in your In Conversation book, page numbers listed here, and take note of what this section offers, how it's organized, and especially the kind of information that you suspect will be the most helpful to you. And I want you to continue working on the annotations for your 2 scholarly peer-reviewed sources. Those are going to be due this Sunday by 11:59 p.m. So make sure that you are doing the adequate research and that you ask any questions if you have them beforehand. There will not be any late work accepted with this assignment, especially because it's crucial to your overall A3 argument paper. So make sure that you get it done. It's really important. And that is it for this week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.